Gary pretty much told my story for me there. Like he said, I needed to shrink that down. But I'm glad to be here with you guys tonight, and I thank you for having me. A total of over 1,735,350 new cancer cases and over 609,000 deaths from cancer are projected to happen in 2018. To me, that number is just unbelievable.
Blows your mind.
It does. It blows your mind. That equals to more than 4,700 new diagnoses every single day. And I don't know about you guys, but how would you feel if that was you or your parent, your spouse, or even your child? It's hard enough when it's your spouse, but I can't imagine it being your child. It's devastating when you hear those words that you have cancer or your family member has cancer. My husband, Christopher, was the strongest, healthiest person I knew in 2014. Never sick a day, never missed a day of work for anything. And all of a sudden, he just became super weak and just kind of was stumbling over his foot a little bit when he walked, and we kind of thought maybe he had mono, because he just felt dragging. It just went on, and it went on for a couple of weeks until I looked at him one day and I noticed that the side of his mouth was drooping a little bit, and my first instinct was, oh my goodness, you've had a stroke, we're going to the emergency room. And he had been laying on the couch for 2 weeks, and he insisted, no, I'm going to work. And he was on night shift, so he went to work, and he immediately, once he got to work, turned around and came back home, because he knew he just couldn't do it. I knew he was coming home, and I was watching out the door for him to come, and when he got home and pulled in the driveway, he fell on the ground getting out of the truck. So we immediately got in the car and went to the emergency room, and they did tests, and they couldn't find anything. They had done a CAT scan, and they couldn't find anything, and sent us home and told us to make an appointment with a neurologist. So this was on a Sunday. So Monday morning, I called to get an appointment with a neurologist for him, and they couldn't see him for over 2 weeks. In that 2 weeks, he went downhill so fast, from kind of dragging that foot to could barely walk at all. So we go to the neurologist, and he sends him for an MRI and a spinal tap. And the spinal tap came back perfectly normal, and the MRI, they saw something. Well, this doctor immediately said that he had MS. So they gave him the regular treatment for MS, which was IV steroids over 4 days. Well, as 4 days went on, he improved, and he kept improving for a week, 2 weeks. He got a lot better. He's back to normal. So we thought, okay, I guess this is what we're going to be dealing with, And of course, we read everything we could find, and we thought, well, he may not have another flare-up of MS. That could be years, so we can deal with this. So he went on, he was doing well, and then 2 or 3 weeks down the line, it was like it was wearing off, and he started having the same symptoms again, just getting worse and worse. So we go back to the doctor, and they do another round of the IV steroids. Got better again. We thought all was well. Maybe the first time just didn't take, So the same thing happened, went back downhill again. So we went to, and of course during this time I'm researching everything I can find on MS, and everybody tells me, you've got to see this one doctor who's the best, MS doctor. So I asked his neurologist at that time to refer him to this other doctor I'd heard so much about. So we get the referral, and just so happened we were able to get an appointment the next day. So we see the new doctor, and he does his own test, MRI and everything, and comes back with the same thing. It's MS. He does more IV steroids. About this time, it's getting around the 1st of December, close to Christmas time. Well, by the time all of those tests and everything came back, before we were able to get the results, he had gone downhill so quickly. He went from walking fine, using a cane, to a walker the next day, to a wheelchair the next day. Couldn't get up by himself at all. I was having to pick him up out of the bed, pick him up from the chair to the bathroom, everything. So I called that doctor's office back, and the nurse told me she could sense the desperation in my voice, because I knew something was wrong, you know. So she got us an appointment to come in that next morning, and when we pulled into the parking lot of the doctor's office, I was driving. My husband couldn't drive at this point. It had affected his entire left side, his left arm and leg. And he got out of the truck over here, and the only parking space was on the end of the lot, and there was like a curve, and it kind of like fell off into a ravine. So when he opened the door and stepped out, he fell off into this ravine, is the only way I can explain it. I mean, it was a huge ditch. So it was pouring down rain, and I get out, I go over in the ditch, and he can't climb up, it's slick, and I can't push him up because he can't use his left side, and I started yelling. Fortunately, somebody was walking through the parking lot and came over and came down in there and pushed him up out of the ditch. So we go into the doctor's office covered in mud, soaking wet, and they wanted to just immediately send him down for more IV steroids. At this point, I had had enough of the steroids, you know. Oh, I knew something was wrong, and I just wanted somebody to do something. So the doctor came in and decided he would go ahead and see him, and they did more tests, and finally decided that he was going to refer him to a neurologist in Birmingham at UAB. So we had an appointment scheduled for January the 26th, and that was on a Monday. Well, the Saturday before that, I had a friend from my church come over just to visit, and she and I had been outside walking, looking at, you know, our plants and things, and when we went back in, Christopher was laying in the floor and he couldn't get up. And when she left, she helped me get him up, and when she left, I started getting text after text after text from every woman in my Sunday school class, where she had spread the word that, you know, y'all need, you know, she needs urging. So I just kept getting these texts urging me to go on to Birmingham, you know. So I called the doctor that we were supposed to see on Monday and got the on-call doctor, and he said, no, do not wait, come now. So we ended up at the emergency room in Birmingham at about 9 o'clock on Saturday night. And when I went in to the emergency room, they already had him in, and there were doctors, and I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many doctors just kept coming in. It was like he was this sight to see or something. There were so many doctors coming in. They all wanted to do their own little test, and we had been going through this for so long. I had a folder about this thick of all of the medical records, and where I had written down every time I had seen, talked to a doctor or a nurse or something, and I handed it to this doctor and said, this is not MS. Please, we are not leaving here until you do something. And the doctor looked me in the eye and said, I assure you, you're not going anywhere until we find out. And it really was maybe 30 minutes before he came back to me and said, we know it's not MS. We don't know what it is, but we're gonna find out. So they put him in the hospital and I couldn't tell you how many tests at that point, and over the next 4 days, and after the biopsy, probably wasn't 2 hours after the biopsy, they came in there and told me that it was central nervous system lymphoma. And they told me it was a good thing, and I didn't understand how that was, but there could have been worse things that it was, Well, I'm thinking anything in the brain is not good, So then they told me that he would have to have chemo inpatient for 4 days every other week in Birmingham. So running through my mind is, okay, we have a child at home. How are we going to be in the hospital 4 days every other week in Birmingham with a child at home, and the overwhelming thought of that, it was overwhelming is the only way I can describe it. I can't imagine another family having to go through that. And that's why I do what I do for Realy For Life. I don't want anybody else to have to deal with those things that we did. We went from, my husband was our only provider. I stayed home with our son, and so once he wasn't able to work, we had no income. And then the hospital bills with inpatient chemo, our copay was $550 every other week when he went in, and they wanted that when he checked into the hospital. So he did the chemo for 5 months, and his body just couldn't take it anymore, so they had to stop treatment. But then he was kind of put on hold for a couple of months, and they decided to do a stem cell transplant. And this is where the Hope Lodge comes into play. I don't know if any of you guys have ever visited that place, but it is amazing. When I go there now, it feels like home, because we were there for so long. And it, I don't know about you guys, but when I go to a hotel, I carry my own sheets, okay? I'm just that kind of person, but it is clean. I didn't feel like I had to worry about things. Not to mention during the whole rest of the process, I had stayed in a hotel a couple of nights just where I could sleep in a bed instead of the chair at the hospital, and it was expensive. And the Hope Lodge was a huge blessing for us. I go there with the new core team a couple of times a year and serve dinner, and it's always just like going home for me. My husband, not so much. He said it's not the best memories for him, but for me it is. We were there, he was in the hospital for 26 days once he had his transplant, and he did amazing. They actually told us to prepare to be there for a lot longer, and when they came in and told us he could go home, not go back to the Hope Lodge or have to stay nearby, he could go home, I really wanted to argue with them and say, no, we can't go home, because we expected to be there so much longer. But since then, he's done physical therapy and rehab, and he is doing well now. He wears a brace on his leg, full leg brace all the way up, and with that on, he is able to get around pretty well, and he's just as hard-headed as ever. And he wants to be out in the garage with all the cords and stuff and, you know, ball and all of that good stuff that men do, and he does those things. But he is, it has changed him. He has a different personality now, but that's something that we'll deal with because he's alive. And that was the whole purpose of all of it. So, thank you guys for letting me come and speak. And I hope you'll